The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army. And now, ladies and gentlemen,
we are now about to witness the truth.
It's the Benjamin Dixon Show.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Benjamin Dixon Show. Benjamin Dixon will not be joining us tonight on his own show. That's a bit rude if you ask me, but you can ask me. Because of a snowstorm warning in Boston, the price you pay for living in Boston, I suppose, not living in NYC. So I'm in charge for tonight. I'm taking over, and joining me in this takeover is my host, Nick Nowlin. How you doing?
I'm doing good. Ready to get to work.
Yeah, we got to get to work. Okay, so the reason I am glad I get to take over tonight is because last week I did a relatively long show regarding Pedersen. They got a little bit of flack because for a variety of reasons, because everyone has elevated him to the sort of one true savior of the Democratic Party and are refusing to engage with his. If you are refusing to engage with his flaws, and you think, considering what happened in the general election, that people would be more willing to engage with people's flaws because ignoring flaws hasn't seemed to help in the past. So I thought we would have just a little bit of a discussion tonight about one of the criticisms that were lobbed at me and the large implications of it, which is that I'm an ideological purist. And I don't think that that's a fair criticism, but we're going to hash it out tonight. Then we're going to go into the unification of the left as a result of Trump, because that is another criticism that was lobbed at me, and I am nothing if not petty, so I'm going to address these things. I think it's an important conversation to have in the aftermath of the general election, while people are still kind of reeling from the fact that Hillary Clinton lost, even though it was a very predictable loss. So let's get right into it. And so, frankly, I'm going to put this out there. Ideological purism is not something I subscribe to or I view as something that is inherently bad. So I'm writing both sides of the fence. What I do subscribe to is having moral red lines. I definitely consider certain things to be non-starters as for politicians. And what it seems like ideological purity is being lack of reflexivity in our politicians. Like the notion that we can legitimately expect our democratic establishment politicians, whether it be Keith Ellison or Chuck Schumer or Nancy Pelosi, to come, and say, okay, we have spent 15 minutes, because that's all it would take, really. Let's be honest. We've spent 15 minutes thinking about why we lost the general election, and we've come to these conclusions. And so, based on these conclusions we've come to, we have decided to not run candidates, and of course, that includes us. But instead, they seem to. This is another decentralization of the. This is another decentralization of the politician. It's somehow purist to say, lose. So maybe they should. Instead, they just want to continue to shift the burden onto the voters. They want to continue to say, well, listen, if X caused you to not vote for us, then you should stop considering X to be a moral red line. You should simply accept that we're not going to change, and therefore you should come to us. This is this narrative of everyone who does not accept the establishment position that you have to have money in politics, you have to have a lot of corporate donors in politics, you have to sort of play this inside game where you are espousing the Russian narrative, you are excusing Hillary Clinton for all of her personal faults, you are blaming everything on sexism and racism. If you're not doing those things, you're a purist, or you're a white nationalist, or you're a pseudo-Trump supporter, because you're not. That doing those things is how you fight Trump adequately. Do you have any idea on this, Nick?
Yeah, I want to come in and point out something. They're lobbying, something called purism, but notice what they're doing. They're saying if you don't think like they do, if you don't accept what they accept, somehow something's wrong with you. And you're being unrealistic, and all your issues and interests and things that you hold dear, all of that has to be subjugated to what they want. That in itself is a form of ideological purity, if you ask me. Maybe not necessarily purity, maybe more like they're putting their interest and their ideology on a pedestal, and they want you to leverage your support for them for nothing in exchange. And I think Yvette Carnell says this a lot. She goes, politics is an exchange. And I really do agree with her pushing that message, because it is. I don't support someone without getting something in return. So if neoliberalism expects me to support it, it must give me something, requisite of that support, right? So what I mean by that is, if you want me to sign on to something, you should be willing to give me some reason to do so, and not just say, well, I'm not going to give you anything, but you still owe me your vote because I'm sure you agree with these things, so you need to vote for me anyway. And it's like, well, no, my main issues are these. Well, that's just unreasonable. That's just unrealistic. You got to give up on all those things. That's just a fantasy land. And I was like, well, what's fantasy about it? It exists in other places. Universal healthcare exists in other places. Cooperatives competing against corporations, they exist in other places. People that actually deal with corporate corruption, it's actually done in other places. None of this stuff is a fantasy. None of this stuff is really like make believe and you just can't do it. But the idea that where we are today is the last destination, is the best we can do. They want to push that forward because they want to maintain things. They want to keep us here. So they want to basically absorb you into a system dominated by their ideology and give you nothing for it. And then if you don't agree with it, you're a fringe and there's something wrong with you.
Well, we have to talk about that. And that's a really big problem on the left. And I think you identified it very well, is that the left, the huge hobgoblin of the left is this pseudo-intellectualism. And one of the manifestations of that pseudo-intellectualism that just troubles the minds of the elite leftists on the coast cities and in the pundit class, and is this idea of maturity, that there's something mature about preemptive compromise, that there's something mature about being recklessly civil. Because let's be honest, the left, the people who, a lot of liberals succumb to reckless civility. They want to compromise, they want to meet you halfway regardless of where your starting point is. They define themselves, they define the halfway mark by where your starting point is, and they don't want the opposition to come to them. They want their theoretical supporters to come to them, as opposed to going to them. And I'm forced to bring this back to Bernie Sanders, and we talk about him a lot, and it gets us a lot of flack, but I do wish he would have run as a third party. And I know a lot of people say, well, he made the deal that he wouldn't run as a third party candidate. He made the deal. And I was like, he should have broke that deal. If that's what the deal he had to make when he got in, that's one thing, but they changed the rules before he did. And to make that deal and then keep that deal at the expense of the American people, at the expense of a lot of his supporters, that wasn't the mature thing to do. That really wasn't the adult thing to do. And this is not meant to consider him immature or immature or a sellout, because he's not a sellout. He has his values, he has his goals, he has his X, Y, and Z, but I don't think that he should be elevated to the position of radical leader that he is not. He's very much, from a global standpoint, moderate in his beliefs. I never heard him espouse a universal basic income. Never heard any of these things from him. And that's not to say that he had to, because for where he was, I was willing to be at for this election. But the left's obsession with maturity and ideological nihilism it's too much.
Let me come in on there too. I was talking with someone over the weekend about this, and, what they told me was, well, I sort of like Bernie Sanders, but I just really wish he wouldn't have did this and that. And I was like, well, it was just a sign of his weakness. And they say, well, it's not really weakness. He just made a bargain or whatever. I was like, well, who deals with scoundrels and keeps their word? Like, when a scoundrel has cheated you, the deal is void. You no longer have to keep that. Truth be told, when you're dealing with scoundrels, you should expect a double cross to begin with, and you shouldn't have any intention of keeping your word regardless. And that whole mythical, well, when they go low, we go high, and all that, that's all just BS. We're in here playing to win, and this is not about process, it's about outcome and result. And to be honest with you, the left would have never been stronger than when they decided to break from the Democratic Party and it cost them an election. The left will be strong at that point, because now, guess what? You have to pay attention to them. You have to give them policy. You are no longer in control of the left. There is a force that actually has more votes than you do, per se, right? And the whole idea that the left runs away from being the reason why the Democrats have lost an election is wrong. We should be embracing that, because that means you have power. They must give you something for your vote. And if they don't, it means they lose. That is power. You don't need to run away from that. You should be embracing that and saying, this is where we are. And if you want our votes, if you want our support, and most of all, if you want to win.
Sorry about that, folks. We had a bit of a streaming error. Hopefully we're back and you can see me now. So before we got cut off, I was just saying the problem is that the Democrats, the base, the pundit class, have been conditioned to accept small victories in representation and are easily lulled into a smug sense of self-satisfaction by liberal pundits who convince them that their intelligence is a victory, even as everything is getting taken away from them. That every loss is lessened by this, this for lack of a better word, this Stephen Colbert, Jon Stewart class of pundits who simply make fun of Republicans, cajole them. They're so backwards, they're so stupid. Jon Stewart, how funny they are. And so, class of pundits, even as everything's being taken away from Republicans, they're so backwards. They find themselves being believing that they're winning. What were you going to say, Nick?
Yeah, I just wanted to come in and make a point that, there was somebody I was listening to, and they were in their 50s, and they said they've been hearing that talk about taking over the Democratic Party and bringing it back to a party of working people and things of that nature. They've been hearing that for over, 30, 40 years, and nothing's ever changed. If anything, it's always getting worse and worse and worse. So the idea that, all of a sudden today is a special day, now we can do what people have been trying to do and have failed for so long is a little bit naive. And I have to agree with that. Now, I want to push back in a sense that I don't think the Democratic Party is not viable because it's losing. I think it's not viable because of it being basically unwilling to respond to its base with actual policy outside of rhetoric, And the losing is more like a symptom, and the cause is because they're basically sold out their base, and they just want to keep pretending. And, there's only so long that you can propel the illusion for most people. Some people will always be asleep, but not everybody's going to be asleep, and you can't fool everybody all of the time.
Well, in that sense, the Democratic Party, or rather Hillary Clinton, the same way that Donald Trump was the best representation of the Republican Party and what it's been working towards for the past 20 or 30 years, Hillary Clinton is the exact same for the Democratic Party. She is the quintessential 80 to 2016 Democrat. And what both she and the Democratic Party have done is shown no growth. They've shown no evolution to outside stimuli. They've been repeatedly been losing ground. They've been shown that their ideas are not working. They've been shown that their ideas are bad. They failed. Neoliberalism is a failure. People are clamoring for a strong populist message, and yet they just do the exact opposite. And even in the aftermath, they still seem unwilling to understand that you can't keep everyone asleep forever. And so it's frustrating to watch, absolutely, but it's even more frustrating to watch people, to be on the outside than watch people who are actively participating in it, who are going back to sleep, for lack of a better word, but actually sort of buying into the same rhetoric. Well, Hillary Clinton lost because of Russia. Clinton lost because of sexism. Clinton lost because of, Bernie Bros and every other thing except for the Democratic Party, and that's really just it. The Democratic Party, as it stands right now, is a losing party. And there are myriad reasons for why it's true, but unless there's actual reflexivity amongst its agents and amongst its higher ups, they can't win. They simply can't win.
Yeah, I think Donald Trump is shown to be, about what I would expect from a Republican, about to get in there and basically screw up a lot of stuff. But the question is, what would Hillary Clinton have done? About along the same sort of stuff. Maybe the media might not have focused on it too much. Like, if we think about it, and when I'm talking about the media focusing on it, Barack Obama, let me start off this way. President Bush gave these budget-busting tax cuts, and they were just this horrible thing. But what happened? When Obama's term came around, it was time to let those tax cuts go. They get extended, and then on top of that, they get made permanent, and then they add to the tax cuts. So Obama's passed 3 rounds of tax cuts. He extended the Bush tax cuts at first, then he made them permanent, then he put sweet ones on top of that. You couple that with the tax cuts that were passed in the TARP, in the bailout bill, 30% of that money was also tax cuts. That makes Obama the tax cutter in chief. Yet nobody's going to remember Obama's legacy as the tax cutter in chief, even though the cumulative effect of all the tax cuts passed under his presidency eclipse George W. Bush's tax cuts. They go much further. Nobody's going to remember that. They're going to remember how liberal a president he was and how cool he was.
And that's a good point. And as we talk about, constantly from the other purists about like never support anything Trump supports. Even if he wants to raise the minimum wage to $18, don't support it because that sends a bad message. It's like, have you ever even looked at the Wikipedia page for logical fallacies? It's like, you do know that's like top 3, just because Hitler liked the dogs doesn't make dogs bad, but whatever. We have to be worried about this notion, like, don't normalize Trump. Yes. You don't want to normalize neo-fascism. You don't want to normalize everything that Trump had along with him. But we also cannot let Trump normalize Obama. And we can't take it a step further. We can't let Trump make us nostalgic for Obama in a way that absolves him of everything bad that he did. And I think that's might be the bigger danger here. I think Trump might be an anomaly, and not necessarily his policy, but in who he is as a person. I think that he was running up against an incredibly weak candidate, so he was able to get through. I think that anyone else would have handily beat Trump, maybe even Obama for a 3rd term if that was legal. But we cannot allow Trump's awfulness at the personality level and even at the policy level, people he surrounds himself with, absolve President Obama of his. And that is what that's the hidden message. That's the true danger of Trump, that people are going to be or Obama to come back, begging for the yoke of neoliberalism. They're going to be and that shows how the structural issues are from the representational issues are, insofar that we're going to have people in the wake of Trump. We have people now in the wake of a Trump election begging for the yoke of neoliberalism to escape the yoke of neo-fascism when they don't understand those two things go hand in hand. And then like that's the funny thing now. And when we talk about the true dangers of Trump, that's one of them, that people are going to be reminiscing about Obama's neoliberal agenda. They're going to be wistful for what Clinton would have brought when she would have just brought more of the same. And that's something we have to talk about when we talk about. Oh yeah, what we didn't talk about right now. It's this idea that there was this sort of false dichotomy put up before a lot of people, for a false choice. I think that we were all being given, which is like, okay, well, do you want to burn the house down with Trump, or for some theoretical unified left, or for Clinton, and something will happen. You won't have Trump, and that's really what it was. Clinton was never offering a solution to Trumpism or neo-fascism or any of those things any of those problems that we have attributed to Trump. She was simply offering an alternative to Trump, and that's different. That's a very different proposition. She was not offering a solution to Trumpism. She was simply offering more of the same structural causes for Trumpism as an alternative to actually having Trump, and eventually getting, maybe something worse, maybe something better down the future. And like that was not of a real choice. And so when people brought up the whole, well, would you rather burn the house down and theoretically unify the left, or would you rather vote for Clinton and stave off the apocalypse, unite the flame, relight the flame, Dark Souls for another 8 years? I mean, that's a false choice, because even if I succumb to lesser of two evils policies, if I think even further than 4 years, if I think 4 years in the future, we're going to eventually get Trump. Like there's no answer in Clinton to Trumpism. There's only more. And so you're not giving me the choice between Trump and Clinton, or you're not giving me the absolute choice between Trump and Clinton, or an absolute choice between fascism and neoliberalism. You're giving me a temporary choice between the two. You have both. But you want to come in, David?
Yeah, I'm going to come in real quick. Actually, on screen for once in my life. Hey guys, I think the real question is, what does the left want? What is the left not willing to do, but have within itself to do? So right now, what we've seen, and we've seen it from like the end of the Carter administration to the start of the Reagan administration, where everything has slowly and faster as we've entered the 21st century, has slowly but and continuously slid to the right. So now we're at this point where we have Trump, who by all accounts is much further to the right than even Reagan was, forgetting about Bush. And the question is, are we going to yearn for what we used to have in Obama, like you guys said a couple minutes ago, where we're accepting of this middle of the way because it's better than the extreme right? Or are we willing to push back hard enough where we can finally push the spectrum where left is no longer, where the middle is no longer America's left, but the real left is left?
I'm not sure, because here's what I would say. I don't believe Obama's even the middle. I believe Obama is really the right. And here's why I'll say that. In order to do those massive tax cuts that he did, first off, you have Democratic people that are generally against tax cuts because their team is doing it. Now they accept them as the norm. They accept them as good policy. They accept them as not exploitative and redistributive, right? So you have the consequences of those tax cuts. He turns around and cuts things like food stamps. What's that? The Center for Budget Analysis, he cut their budget. He gave federal workers, unpaid furloughs. He slowed the growth of government by instituting hiring freezes. This is the kind of stuff that you just can't have any type of representative on the left doing. And for this reason, this is why, I feel like Obama really is very right wing. And then on top of that, when you cut all this stuff from the social spending, it's not like you just let it be even to pay for the tax cuts. No. You also at the same time borrow more money to increase military spending. So the budgetary effects really aren't, it's not like he actually did something good for the budget. He just shifted money, from one thing to another, more or less. And that's problematic in so many ways. Now, Donald Trump coming in presents new dangers, right? But at the same time, it's really a continuation of a lot of what Obama's already done. It's that now people will scream bloody murder for it because Trump is doing it, when Obama set us on this path far long ago, and people will still believe that somehow he's fundamentally different from Donald Trump. And really, he's just a better actor. Donald Trump, is not a good actor. He's real and raw. And he's going to tell you he's going to screw you over. Whereas Obama will say, hey, the TPP is going to save American jobs. Just straight lie to your face. Just straight lie to your face and believe it, And so I don't know. I don't know what to say about it other than that.
Well, I mean, for that to occur, we have to shift away from only criticizing the excesses of the system. And I think that's a real big problem that we have within our society. The mainstream media, even our joking mainstream media, our Stephen Colbert's, our Daily Shows, our Trevor Noah's, our Olive, I'm sorry, I can't remember his name, the other British guy. All they do is criticize John Oliver. There we go. All they do is criticize the excesses of neoliberalism. All they do is criticize the excesses of racism. Let me be perfectly honest. Police brutality is an excess of a racist system. And if that is your metric for what racism is and the plight of Black people, you have a very low bar for the way people should be living in society. Absolutely, Black people should not be being killed in the streets. But again, that's an excess of a racist system. it's not an anomaly, it's an excess. Well, what is racism really like? What is sexism really like? Well, what does poverty, what's the face of poverty? America was inoculated to identity politics. They were inoculated to critiques of racism and sexism. They were inoculated to all of the sort of those labels. And that is partially true, but as we talk about purism, the left, the Democrats, the Democratic establishment never made racism or sexism or classism or elitism red line in the sand because they never could afford to. Like we never had a situation where if you were president, you simply could not have any kind of racist baggage. That wasn't allowed. That's because it would disqualify a lot of people on the right. I mean, on the left as well. It would definitely have disqualified Clinton. Like if we had if racism disqualified you from being president of the United States, Clinton could not have run either. And we're not just talking about her when she was 17. We're talking about her 8 years ago. The 2008 primary was one of the most racist primaries in the history of America in terms of Clinton versus Barack Obama. And so the left can whine about how America was just so racist and sexist, but they never actually wanted to change that in conversation. Like their solution to sexism in America, or their first step was electing a female president, like a white female, elite, rich, basically to the office, as shattering the glass ceiling. And I can understand the value in that. I definitely understand the value in breaking that barrier, but but before we break the glass ceiling, maybe we should shatter the concrete structure of racism. Maybe that's where we should start. And that has never been part of the conversation. It's always been these very, very lofty goals, these very, very high bars and very, very performative acts of like getting a female to the highest office. Like, okay, obviously we can't rank types of oppression because they're all based on the same structure. But, the glass ceiling has much less effect on people than, again, what I would call the concrete structure of racism. And by that I mean the fact that we don't have clean water in Flint, Michigan.
Well, what
you were going to say, David?
Yeah, and then Nick can come in. But I was just going to say, why is it that it's always these lofty terms and these nice sounding talking points as opposed to the real issues that would. You're never going to completely get rid of racism, at least not in our lifetime. But you can change things systematically that reduce it, and long term, you'll see that reduce. Why is it that you always see all these lofty things being said? It's easy. It's easy for politicians to run on it and make issues out of it, and then turn a blind eye once they have an easy solution that they can claim will resolve something.
Well,
I mean,
I think the answer to your question. I think the answer to your question would be because it's really not easy, and it's really not just a lofty goal. That what I'm saying. It's really easy to say, like you said, but it's really not easy to solve because race and class are tied together. And once you start trying to tackle class, you're cutting into somebody's money. And what I like to point out is whenever I start talking about money, people like to tell me, well, that has nothing to do with me. It's like, no. This is all related. You are suffering because somebody's profiting off your suffering. And I think that's probably the best way I have had to get people to realize why we should care about the dollars, why we should care about, things that affect us, because they have to understand that the situation that sucks for them is making someone else tons and tons of money. And that's why it's that way. And I think that's going to be the root. I think that's going to be the catalyst that kind of people can kind of grasp around.
Well, I have a different answer for your question. That answer is because it won't really do anything. Like Clinton winning president would not have actually cost anyone any money. And so, like Nick says, this goes all back to what Martin Luther King Jr. was saying. Like people love solutions to racism and sexism and classism. At least the left does. The wealthy left, the elite left, love solutions to these these huge problems that won't actually cost anyone any money. That won't actually upset the status quo. Clinton winning would have upset the status quo in a very, very minimal way. It would have had no real effect on class or distribution of money. It just wouldn't have. And so when the mainstream left looks for narratives about how to solve racism or how to solve classism or how to solve sexism, although they don't really tackle classism, or how to solve homophobia or Islamophobia, they always look for narratives that are from rich people and whose definitions of racism and sexism and homophobia are just like, well, I don't like people saying mean words to me. Like I don't think like that's my like that is what racism and sexism is. And what the Democrats were unable to contend with this time around was not everyone views it the way they do. Not everyone is allowing them to define the conversation about racism and sexism for them in a way that absolves the Democratic Party and the upper middle class elite from being implicated in those. And that's what the Democratic Party spent a lot of time trying to do this election. And that's why they failed a lot. They spent a lot of time trying to scapegoat large swaths of the populace for these structural problems and place blame. Here, Hillary Clinton, referred to her statements about her as a racist statement. And I think that would have gone relatively far. Like they just sort of deflected, and they painted their adversaries, or rather their critics, whether they be on the left or on the right or in the middle or anywhere, as the real racist, because they weren't supporting the Democratic Party. They weren't towing the line. And that has been sort of the classic strategy of the Democratic elite for a very long time, that we have dominance because we won the culture war, quote unquote. And since we won the culture war, since we've become the arbiters over what is racist and sexist and prejudiced in America in terms of representation. And so if you do not align yourself with what we think these things are, you, by nature of not being aligned with us, sexist or X or Y or Z, and we're gonna paint you as such. We're gonna drag your name through the mud, even if you're Bernie Sanders, even if you're a black woman, even if you're even if you're a cripple, a disabled veteran, we're still gonna call you these things simply because these things are in liberalism as part of the Democratic strategy for winning the left has been to make liberalism intrinsic, or synonymous with being a Democrat. And so they don't feel the need to actively go out there and have their policies or their positions match the ideology of liberals or people on the left or progressives. They simply try to dominate. Well, we are the only metric for the left. Obama's not on the left, Obama's on the right. By any conceivable great, spectrum, he's on the right. He's closer to Reagan than he is to FDR. Absolutely. And so Democratic strategy is just like, well, we call ourselves the left. And so if you're not with us, you're not the left.
Yeah. And I think a big important thing moving forward. I remember, David, you asked about, what is the left to do about this? I would say the first order of business is to grab the definition of left, grab what that means, and wrest it from the neoliberals. Neoliberals should have no representation on the left at all. That is first order of business. And we're, to be honest with you, until that is done, countering the right is going to be very, very difficult, because guess what? The right is well represented. It has dominance on your supposed side of the fence. Half of the people on the left are on the right, really. How are you supposed to win that? That's not going to work out as some sort of electoral strategy. You have to get those people to show what they really are. We have to draw the line and show this is where the left really is. These are where our ideals are. These are majoritarian ideas, and we're going to fight and represent them. Win or lose.
And that leads me to my other point about this, because I know that was one of the arguments for why you should vote for Donald Trump if you are a progressive, because he will unify the left. And I've been accused of holding that position, even though I said back then that was a stupid position to have, not because burning down the house is stupid, because it wasn't going to unify the left. So even if you thought it was going to unify the left, it wasn't going to unify the left. B, because the definition of the left as it exists right now is so vague and amorphous, and it's so dominated by people who are not actually on the left, that I don't want a unified left under Chuck Schumer. I don't want a unified left under Nancy Pelosi because that's not the left. And C, I don't want a unified left at all. I think that it's time to move away from a two-party system. I don't think that any good can come from having two proto-political parties that define themselves under the amorphous terms of left and right and have no proactive agendas. And eventually, all they do is devolve into antagonistic policies that can be summed up as, well, I'm not them. And honestly, that is what the Democratic strategy this time was. It was to simply point to the Republicans and cover their mouth with their hand and go, well, we're not them, right, guys? And it's like what the hell? It's like, so from my perspective, the unification of the left is not desirable, nor is it plausible. Why would I want to go back to the way things were when it led us here? And even if the left is going to be unified, then it has to be we can come together for specific issues, but we can't come together under this broad umbrella of the quote unquote left for everything, because I'm sorry, that's dumb. That's an incredibly dumb thing to desire.
Well, see, I actually take a different approach on that. I do believe, we can come together and work on issues, but what I'm going to say here is going to probably offend a lot of people, but the people that are only voting for abortion or everybody has their own fringe issue, right? Those individuals who will try to browbeat someone like me, who's really, I'm voting for economic justice. I'm voting for economic justice and social justice for all people. Those are my issues that I really, really hold close to my heart, right? If you aren't really tugging on an issue or a pillar that I find that's going to really advance that agenda, why should I vote for abortion rights? I may agree with it, but I feel like my main area is over here. So unless you are willing to support a candidate that's going to support what I'm feeling, what I'm in agreement with, why should I support yours? Politics is an exchange. That's how the coalition has to be built. So, unification of the left, if it is to take place, it would have to be some sort of form where, hey, I will support you on this, but you have to support this as well. And if you're not, then we can't talk. Nobody's going to get anything unless everybody gets something. That's generally what it has to come down to. If everybody can't get something, nobody's going to get anything. And I think Martin Luther King said it, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
That was Sister Soldier. Was that not Sister Soldier?
No, I think it was Sister Soldier maybe quoting Martin Luther King, but I'm pretty sure that's a Martin Luther King quote.
Well, I agree, and I think that they miscalculated how much people succumbed to how much fear there was of Trump, how much they had control over definition of racism and sexism, and also what they had to offer to get Hillary Clinton into the office of president. If that was their one and only goal, there were things they could have offered. There were actual, I wasn't made of stone when it came to voting for Hillary Clinton. They just didn't want my vote. They didn't think they had to come get it, because all it would have taken was some sort of proactive plan to move us away from how we got to this point. And that simply wasn't on the table. No one laid out a plan to say, okay, well, here's the thing. If we are now in a situation where we are voting for two candidates who are two of the least popular candidates in the history of American society. In no time in history have both candidates been so universally disliked. We can't keep doing this, guys. This is rock bottom. I would have liked, for President Obama to come out and give America the rock bottom speech. Okay, well, you know what? This is rock bottom. Trump and Clinton are rock bottom. Or rather, Trump and Clinton are not rock bottom. Trump is grabbing a shovel after you hit rock bottom and deciding to dig your way through the core to get to China. Clinton is, for lack of a better word, one of those little anglerfish that have the lights on their head that convince you that you're not at rock bottom when you really are. So we're at the bottom of the ocean. The analogy I'm using is that Trump is a shovel that you're trying to dig through the Earth's core to get to China that's no longer at the bottom of the ocean. And Clinton and the Democratic Party are these little fish with the lights that convince you that you're higher up than you actually are and that you're not at rock bottom. But really, we're at rock bottom. And so what would have gotten me to vote for Clinton would have been to destabilize the neoliberal agenda, the neoliberal infrastructure that exists in American society that led us to this point, and say, hey, you know what? We can't do this anymore, guys. We can't. They're too evil.
That's an interesting point. That's an interesting point. What would have made me vote for Hillary Clinton? And right off the top of my head, I can think of 6 things that she would have had to make substantial effort on. there'd have been no question, universal health care, Medicare for all, everybody. That's it, universal health care, and some sort of plan to make sure that the savings from such a thing actually benefit the consumers, right? The savings actually passed on to the general populace and be enrolling in the system. So that's a non-starter. If she was no on that, then she's getting negative. She has to come with it on that. They have to come with some sort of jobs program where the government would now become the employer of last resort to address the unemployment issue. And also, we would have also needed some sort of commitment to make college more affordable, and then some sort of commitment to some sort of wartime mobilization for green energy or renewable energy as our primary source of electricity. Like, those would have had to been firm commitments before I even considered anything from Hillary Clinton, and that just wasn't on the table in any shape or form.
I just think at this point, when we talk about lesser of two evils politics, I am not inherently against lesser of two evils politics. I just want everyone to be on the same page, and that is that the person we're voting for is still incredibly bad. They're just not the theoretical worst or practical worst. And in this election, we saw such ignoring of reality that the candidate people were in favor of, at least in the liberal side, was also incredibly problematic, and also incredibly right wing. And and so a lot of times when you criticize people like Keith Ellison or Hillary Clinton, you fall into this sort of, well, you shouldn't damn the good with the perfect. You shouldn't say, well, this is a good choice, but he's not perfect. That goes back to the purism argument. And my response to that is, yes, you should not damn with the good with the perfect, but you also shouldn't absolve the bad because of the worst. It's like you should not succumb to this. You shouldn't try to assuage your cognitive dissonance over voting for a really problematic candidate by doing mental gymnastics to pretend like they are not problematic. And that was the big issue on the left. And I think that's what lost them a lot of votes. This notion that, okay, instead of critically engaging with why people don't like her, instead of critically engaging with why people don't like the Democratic Party in general, what we're going to do is we're going to pretend she has no faults. And then, because for us, we consider ourselves to be good people, to be good rational people, to be good logical people. And so we're going to pretend like she doesn't have any faults. We're going to pretend as though we don't have any faults as a party and that we've never done anything bad, but we're going to still use rhetoric. Deplorables, who cares if for every Democrat we lose in a blue collar, we're going to gain to it. Like, we're going to use rhetoric that demonstrates that we do not understand why people do not like us in the first place. So they shot themselves in the foot here, in the sense that, and now everyone who doesn't want you to criticize Keith Ellison is making that exact same mistake. Denying someone's faults simply because you want them to win does not actually help them win. It simply makes people who are on the fence wonder what you're hiding and why you won't be honest.
Well, hold on. Nobody. You can't say, well, okay, when you're running a campaign, there's no way you can campaign on, well, our candidate's not very good, but please vote for it anyway.
I'm talking about campaigners. I'm talking about the media. I'm talking about the liberal media. I'm talking about the new left media.
Again, since they're all a part of the system, they're all trying to get that person in there. That's not a viable strategy for gaining votes. I don't think that that's the strategy at all. You have to try to make it seem like they're good, because that's what people are going to vote on. They're not going to vote for somebody that's bad. If you tell them that, well, this person's kind of bad, they're going to be agnostic about the issue. But at the same time, I just believe that Hillary Clinton was the wrong person to run. I don't think there was anything she could have done to win that election. She just wasn't the right candidate. She should have never been there. There should have been no Hillary Clinton running as a representative of the left. She's just the wrong candidate to run.
Well, no doubt. The Democratic Party they just outright handed the election to Donald Trump. They just did. I don't know. And the reason why is that this was a populist election, and once you silence the voice of populism on the left, was right wing pseudo populism.
Yeah, and it's really bad. And what's so bad about it is they're not going to learn from this.
They say populism, like,
I was just gonna say, I think it was Michael Salomon that I saw tweeted it out either yesterday or today, and you can find him at Michael Salomon. But I think he tweeted something to the effect of, with all of these actions that we're taking against Russia, and I'm not trying to, and this stays on the point that we're on now, with all of the noise that's being made over Russia's supposed involvement and everything that the Obama administration is doing to go after them. If they really were interested in in going after the bad behavior or the games that were played behind the scenes, they'd be cleaning house at the Democratic Party. They'd be getting rid of all of the players that took part in taking the choice away from the voters and actually manipulating the results. And that's not being done. So I think that's very telling.
Yeah, I have to agree with that.
Well, the Russia thing is just part of this. I mean, let's be honest. For most people who are actually engaging with this Russia thing, and I don't say, and actually, you know what? Let me rephrase that. For people who are not actually engaging in this Russia thing, for people who are, sort of just skimming it and like repeating the narratives, it is simply a predicate to an argument that Hillary Clinton should have won the election. And that's why we have 50% of Clinton voters out there who think that Russia literally tampered with the vote count. Despite the fact that Keith Olbermann isn't going out there and saying, well, because Russia did this, Clinton lost. It's like this whole Russia thing is just the lead up to the conclusion that, well, Clinton really won, but there was this big, massive conspiracy, because otherwise, how could she have lost? And that's problematic. If we want to talk about Russia in this election, that is one thing, but the conversation still needs to understand that Clinton lost. Thing is that there's so much vague language being used. There's so much like lead up to the conclusion that, well, Clinton should have won anyway, and that it should really be Clinton going in office. That the Russia thing is only acting as another shield for the Democratic Party to not learn their lesson, and that's a problem. So whether or not we acknowledge that Russia played some part in this hack is a different question with whether or not Clinton should have won the election. And the answer to that question is no. And we need to have people who are promoting this Russian narrative come out and go, okay, yeah, Russia may have released information in a sort of strategic transparency. No one's saying they made it up. Maybe that's the case. I don't believe that to be the case. I mean, I have yet to see evidence of that to be the case. We have yet to see
evidence that Russia was involved in the leak. Yeah. Still, even that evidence they released, I read that report that it did not link it to a country. It was like generic. It was said 2 actors. This was access to. We don't know who or what, but these are typical attacks used by Russians. It's like, well, no, these are typical attacks used by anybody trying to break into a system. Sorry.
Yeah, but what this is on the part of the left, on the part of your Keith Olbermann, or your part of your Sean Kings, whoever is doing this. It's a very lazy, disingenuous type of journalism where they are leading you up to a conclusion and then pulling out last minute because to say the conclusion would be completely nonsense and ludicrous, but they want to lead you there. They want to hold your hand all the way up to the last part of the narrative, which is, well, Russia did all these things and then Donald Trump won, and he's maybe a Putin spy and he's friends with Putin, and a lot of his people got the Russian Star of Freedom, and I once saw him with a bear and he used a sickle at some point. And blah 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 blah. And before they get to that point where they go, that's why we should actually have Clinton as president, they pull away. But that's the argument you're making, and that's the argument that you're trying to make, and all you're doing is stripping out the last portion, and that makes you disingenuous. If you want to come out and say, well, if Sean King, instead of tweeting out 1,000 tweets regarding how, and I'm not meaning to pick on him, but he's in my feed about how these hacks prove that they did X, Y, and Z, then just say it. But the fact that you won't say what you want to say, which is that's why we need to appoint Clinton, or that's why Clinton should win, or that's why X, Y, and Z should have happened, then you become disingenuous. Then it's like, then what you're saying is inflammatory and basically nonsensical and would have you laughed out of all but the most conspiratorial circles, but that's the argument you're making. And to pull out last minute is just to be a coward. You don't want to co-sign your name to, well, Russia hacked the election and defrauded us of our quote unquote democracy. So I don't know what to say.
And these same people. Go ahead.
So here's what I'll say on this whole Russia thing. I think that this should not be about Russia, and it shouldn't be about the Democratic Party. Shouldn't be about Trump. It really needs to be about who you're getting your information from and whether you're listening or thinking. In my mind, all of these people just going along with the talking point. It may have been Russia. Let me break away from that for a second. Russia may have swayed things that they didn't tamper with the vote. Use your head and think about how those damn numbers are even obtained. They didn't just go into a computer and type some numbers to change the count. They may have hacked something. They may have leaked something. Russians that aren't part of the Kremlin, that aren't directly tied to the government, may have been involved. I'm still waiting on proof of that to be able to say, okay, sure. But even aside from the Russians, there's all this talk of all of these government agencies are saying it. Yeah, and they also said that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. There was also our government behind things that ended up being false. That either they were wrong, and so my whole point there is that before you just say, well, they said it, so it must be true. No, use your head and ask questions.
No, people are going to ask.
That's the problem with an engaged populace. We're not asking questions.
People don't ask questions when people tell them what they want to hear. That's called being an enabler. That's called being an enabler. You don't ask questions when, and everyone, most people succumb to this fault. That if you tell me that you're on my side and that you support me and blah blah blah, I'm much less likely to ask you questions or challenge you. And at this point, the CIA, or at least the mainstream media, is simply enabling a Democratic Party in a lot of ways that is dangerous, because it's preventing, or whatever, post-mortem, for lack of a better word. Like that is what it is. It's just enabling. This Russian narrative is enabling people's entitlement complex.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no doubt. It's hard to roll upon somebody and tell them that the CIA is just not credible. Like when you try to tell somebody that institutions that are under the office of the president and toe the line are just not credible institutions, and you can just point to all the times they've lied on the record, and then 30 years later the documents come out and the truth was really something completely opposite of what was disseminated to the public at the time via leaks and via media sources that act as instruments for government propaganda. Like, when you try to go and tell somebody that, hey, look, just because the government says it doesn't mean it's true, like, it's really hard to get them to understand that they're being lied to understand that there's a reason why the government says what it does. And I hate to be one of those people that says government is the enemy. But in many instances, when it comes to disseminating information, they don't want you to really know what's going on. One of the ways that you maintain and control is you control the flow of information.
So
we should probably wrap this.
So it's 10:07, and I know I want to stay on for about another 10 minutes just to wrap up this and two other things. Did you have something to close on this, Brandon?
Well, yeah, and I mean, like, it comes down to this: most people want to be lied to when the lie is something that they want to hear or get them what they want. So you have people out there right now on the left who have been on the opposite side of the CIA, have been on the opposite side of all these government agencies for the past 10, 15, 20 years. But now that they might get them what they want, they suddenly believe them wholeheartedly. Like they just absolutely believe everything that's being said to them.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it's pretty obvious. I think they would push back on that and say that we're conspiracy theorists. But at the end of the day, there's nothing.
Of course, everyone's rational. Everyone. This whole Russia thing is completely logical and completely rational. And the people the left is the smart party. The Democrats are the smart party. They're not prone to hysterics and flights of jingoism or nationalism or crying wolf or any of those things that they accuse the right of. Really, being a Republican and being a Democrat are two entirely different. They're just two different types of people, because one is on the right and one is on the left. So they must be opposites, right? It's not as though both parties, both the elected officials, the establishment, and the highest people, or rather the sort of highest class of both parties are essentially the same people. It's not as though they hang out together all the time. It's not as though they go to the same clubs. It's not as though they belong to the same social circles. That's not true. Being a Democrat or Republican basically mean that you're two different species. Oh wait, no, that's succumbing to ideological reductionism. That's saying that everyone that the vast majority of people's life choices and experiences and can be explained by what vague political ideology has succumbed to, when that's just not true. If anything, that's the one takeaway we should get from this electoral cycle. The Democrats are just as stupid as Republicans are. They are just as big of racists. They're just as big scumbags. They are just as prone to chant for more war if it gets them what they want. And that like largely this myth of the divide, at least when it comes to morality and intellectualism between the left and the right, is just that it's a myth. It's a myth that both parties have been propping up because the Democrats the Democrats enrich themselves by pretending that they're winning, and the Republicans enrich themselves by pretending that they're losing.
I do want to make the point that there is absolutely nothing wrong, seriously, with being friends with a Democrat or a Republican. But
there's nothing. There is a danger there. There is a danger there, and I'll tell you what that danger is. And this is a conversation that I've had with Adair about becoming too involved at the local Democratic level. Because if you spend a lot of time with anybody, you're prone to like them, and that makes you forget that despite them being a personally good person, I have no doubts that probably Mitt Romney is a decent person personally. I have no doubt that a lot of people who I dislike at the professional or I would enjoy hanging out with. I'm sure I would like to meet President Obama. I'm sure I would love to meet President Obama. But that's the danger, that if you spend too much time with these people, if you listen to President Obama speak for too long, you forget that they are so problematic, and it becomes hard. And that's why journalists shouldn't be hanging out with politicians to begin with.
So there's a difference there, though. There's a difference between listening to someone speak and having a relationship with a person, listening to the speeches and buying into all the talking points and knowing someone. I know you were saying a lot of what you were saying tongue-in-cheek before. I was just kind of...
Which part?
Well, the whole thing, how we're different species and all of that stuff.
Yeah, I mean that's the whole team sports mentality of it, and that's how people get their rocks off at this point, by pretending as though the Republican Democrats are so different. And this is another barrier to overcome, not just when it comes to political ideology, but when it comes down to basically any ideology, whether that be like a religious ideology like Muslim or Christian, or feminism and men's rights activism, or any kind of ideological position you might have in your head, is this notion that these are divorced from your experiences, that you can somehow be a Republican or rich Republican or rich Democrat, and that richness cannot influence how you view the world or your ideology. Because functionally what that has allowed people to do is create definitions of pretty socially responsible ideologies, definitions of feminism, definitions of anti-racism, definitions of Christianity that just promote more neoliberalism. Treated as though, well, if you call yourself this ideology, you're just it. You can do it. You can basically just say, well, I'm a Democrat, therefore I'm a liberal, and therefore everything that I do is liberalism, and you shouldn't pay attention to the millions of dollars I have in the bank because that has no effect on my neoliberalism. You shouldn't pay attention to it. Don't worry about it. So we need to start engaging in a nuanced conversation about how lived experience, how your race, how your class, how your gender, how your geographic location influences your ideology in a very meaningful way. Because let's be perfectly honest, the feminism Hillary Clinton was espousing was awful. The feminism that Hillary Clinton was espousing during the implications of it were so damaging for so many different types of women. And it becomes frustrating to have to explain to somebody, well, listen, the problems you're identifying with feminism, because this is a conversation you have to have with people who claim to be anti-feminist, people who claim to be anti-Black Lives Matter, people who claim to be, well, I'm against Democrats or because they are X, Y, and Z. It's like a lot of the problems that you're attributing to the ideology, or even Islam, a lot of problems you're attributing to the ideology, a lot of problems you're attributing to feminism or being a Republican or being a Muslim is actually a problem with the structural and material conditions of their lives. Like a lot of the problems that you're identifying with Islam in the Middle East is a result of poverty and unequal access to resources in a global market. It's not really a issue of Islam. Islam, is the way that it's being colored, but these are issues of poverty. And with black culture, it's not a problem with black culture or something inherently black. It's a problem with poverty in America. And so guys under these vague notions of either identity or experience, either identity in a sort of racial or or a sort of sexual way, or ideological identity. And so we really need to start really engaging very lived experience and how that influences theology or some of the more.
Let me say this. Back to the question you asked, though, Dave. What is the left supposed to do? I've said this at least 3 times.
Because I do want us to just start wrapping up this last segment and then bring one other thing up. So, to your point, it's the same subject, but let's just close out with what do we have to do in the next in the near future and the long term? Pick one, long term, near future, both. What do you think should be going on?
Okay, so what I was going to say is what the left does need to do. I said either you need to call the neoliberals, but how can that be, feasibly done? I think right now we have to understand that, the third parties, the outside parties are really where we should be. I'm not saying you have to go green. I'm not saying you have to do the Progressive Independent Party, but I'm saying as of right now, the Democratic Party as it exists is the enemy. And we really do need to basically move away from it en masse, because basically politics is an exchange, and they have told you that they're not going to give you anything. If they're not giving you anything, it's time to move along. Somebody else promised you the world. Maybe they can't give you the world, but if y'all work together, you can get something. So I think that's kind of the mentality we need. If you're not going to give us anything, we're going to leave. And when they call your bluff, you need to be strong enough to walk away. If that means Donald Trump 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all of them win, so be it. Because you're going to get what you're going to get eventually. That's how you have to be. These are losses that have been dialed in from supporting the Democratic Party a long time ago, and they're unavoidable. It's going to be when you decide to draw that line in the sand and really stand on it and say, no, you're going to do this because the power really lies with the people and not you. We set the agenda, not you. When you start really in engaging in that and understanding what that means and using it to your advantage, it's going to be a different game. It's going to be a whole different ball game.
Don't let people tell you where don't let people convince you to meet them where they are to validate their choices or validate their cowardice. Because at this point, it seems as though people are using words like purism and vague conspiracy theories and lesser of two evils to try to shame people into giving up their standards and giving up their right to choose in order to validate the choices that they have made and, basically assuage their guilt when it comes to supporting candidates that they know are problematic. And so, make compromise where you can and stand up for what you believe in. Like Captain America once said, sometimes the world really is wrong. What do you do, when the world tells you to move? It's like, well, sometimes you plant your feet by the, like a tree by the river of truth and say, no, you move. And so if you have to be a very, very vocal, very, very, radical minority that is the only one who is, pushing for certain things, even as the world tells you, no, you should have voted for Clinton because blah, blah, no, you shouldn't have voted for her. That's the position you have to take. And it may seem it may seem irrational by nature of the fact that you're standing there by yourself or relatively by yourself. But here's the thing. Sometimes the world is wrong. Easy thing to say, but it's true. Sometimes the whole world is wrong, but you, and you have to, kind of fight for what you believe in regardless.
Well said. I would just urge everybody, being the least of the intellectuals on this panel, to think, ask questions, don't just buy into what you're hearing or what you're being told, because I think really when that's what we've been doing for way too long, and the more that continues, the more we go down that path, it's not leading us anywhere good. And I do think there's hope for the left, for progressives. I think that while everyone's up in arms or frustrated, at the same time, it gives us an opportunity, and we've seen multiple movements, some that some like, some that some don't like. But I think that the organizing can be done if we stop getting distracted by the bullshit.
Oh yeah, I agree. I want to say, cause I don't let Trump unify you. It's like if you're on the left, don't let Trump unify you, and if you are going to let Trump unify you, don't let Trump unify you under the Democrats. At least not they exist now. You know, at this point, unification under the Democrats is tantamount to, you know,
submission to neoliberalism.
Submission to neoliberalism, because they will not learn. And at this point, they're using fear of Trump, like I said before, to not have to learn. And so we have to demand, at the very least, that they actively engage with their own faults. You know, like we have to hold them accountable. All I talk about holding people's feet to the fire, it's time. The best time to, like I said, you know, like it's like the old saying, the best time to hold Hillary Clinton's feet to the fire would have been, you know, 18 months ago. Time is right now.
Yeah, that's in the past, and there's really no point in rehashing it. Anyway, so the only other thing that I wanted to say is, if I can switch my screen here, since I'm doing the production at the same exact time. Apologies for the glitches tonight and the technical difficulties. Like we said earlier, Ben, we did have a whole end of the year show planned tonight, but unfortunately snow in Boston seems to have snowed on our parade. So we will be doing that on Politics and Grits. If you guys have seen it, you know where to find it on the Spreaker channel, Benjamin Dixon on Spreaker. If you don't, Spreaker.com/shows/politics and grits. You can find it right there. Where we do it every Sunday. We'll be doing it pre-recorded this time, but we will be doing it. And I know that Ben would have been saying Happy New Year to everybody if he was on. So from Progressive Army in general, Happy New Year. We have lots of stuff planned. I don't know if Brandon, if you want to go into anything from your show, or Nick from the Takedown, but I can tell you from Progressive Army's end, we're loading up on new writers on the website. So definitely look out for that. And there's quite a bit of plans for the Benjamin Dixon Show and for The Way with Anoa. So 2017 is looking like a really, really big year, and I can't really hype that enough because I can't go into details just yet. But lots of big stuff going on. Did either of you want to talk about your shows?
Yeah, we're gonna go through some big changes on Thursday nights. You know, stick with us, and I guarantee you'll like it. Sorry for the sort of vague unpreparedness of this show tonight. As you said, we had something planned, something more extensive planned with me, Ben, and Anoa, or Ben, Anoa, and I rather. But you know, needs must when devil drive. We didn't want to leave you guys with nothing, so we came in just to talk bullshit with you. So stick with us. Thanks for joining us again.
All right. Oh yeah, I just want to say the Takedown with Nick. We will be doing a show. What's that? Monday. Yeah, I think we're still doing a show Monday.
The 2nd.
Yeah, the 2nd. Monday the 2nd. We will still be doing a show. So I'll be having someone come on with me. We're just going to basically start meeting some of the members of my local Green Party. That's going to be very interesting. We're going to talk to him about that. And the last thing I want to say is remember that if you're on the radical left, be the rock. Let the neoliberals crash against us and be broken.
Good night, everyone. Happy New Year from Progressive Army. That was...
The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog, join the Progressive Army, and support The Benjamin Dixon Show. It's Ben Dixon! If you like this episode, be sure to share, like, and subscribe.
Consider becoming a Patreon. Go to www.patreon.com/the BPD Show and support The Benjamin Dixon Show.